welcome back to a return visit of the Antiques Roadshow to Senate House, the Art Deco hub of the University of London. It's a building that's inspired both adoration and loathing. Award-winning architect Charles Holden was a man on a mission, and in 1933 he started construction in Bloomsbury on what would become one of London's most iconic neoclassical buildings, the epitome of 1930s modernity. Clad in Portland stone, it dominated the London skyline and attracted rather mixed reviews. The university's first chancellor, Lord Macmillan, described it as an impressive combination of dignity and beauty, one of the finest examples of 20th century British architecture. Others thought it totalitarian in its scale, even Stalinist, and the novelist Evelyn Waugh described it as a gross mass of masonry. Personally, I like the elegance and simplicity of the building. There's a real sense of space and light. But I find the overall effect is rather cold. The architect, Charles Holden, wanted to create a building fit for purpose and devoid of excessive architectural adornment. Job done. Senate House is also home to SOAS, formerly known as the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is celebrating its centenary. 5,000 students from 133 different countries study here. And one former lecturer, called William McGovern, is said to be the inspiration for the world's most famous fictional archaeologist, Indiana Jones. In the 1920s, McGovern set off on an epic and undercover journey to the Tibetan capital, Lhasa, known as the Forbidden City. Few Westerns were allowed in, and he was eventually uncovered and expelled by the monks. But he put his experiences to good use, publishing in 1924 To Lhasa in Disguise, an account of a secret expedition through mysterious Tibet. But it's down in the basement, I'd say, that has the biggest surprise of all. Look at this. It's like something off the Starship Enterprise. And back in the 30s, this was one of the first buildings to use electricity to heat the place, and all the original equipment is still here. Isn't it fabulous? So let's get the power switched on so our experts can get started upstairs. Here we go.
I want to thank you on two counts. Firstly, for bringing the nicest possible scrimshaw I have seen for many a year, but also I believe you've flown into Heathrow this morning.
Yes, it is.
From where?
From Antwerp, Belgium.
Oh, right. Well, I'm glad to hear that you enjoy the Antiques Roadshow over there as well.
Yeah, we do.
It's a scrimshaw, which is something that would have been made by a whaler. This one is quite unusual because it's on bone rather than ivory. Now, with ivory today, there's a lot of legislation relating to CITES. You're not allowed to import it into the States, and people are uncomfortable about owning ivory today, understandably. But this is bone. There's no restrictions.
Okay.
A whaling scene, probably in the South Seas, and it's unusual because it's coloured. You often see the colour. It's got the blue and the coat of the red. Now, what's going on here? Here's the whaling ship, and then you have the longboats that are trying to capture or kill this whale here, but it's called the Death. But who's dying? It looks like the whalers are dying there, doesn't it?
I bet so, yeah.
Tell me, where did you find it?
In an auction house in Antwerp.
And how long ago did you acquire it?
Like a month ago.
A month ago?
Yeah.
So it's very new?
It is, to my collection it is.
And you like it, obviously?
Yes, absolutely.
So when you saw it at auction, what did appeal to you about it?
The main theme of the collection is adventure, and that fits in right in.
But full of action?
It is.
And it's right down here in the corner, it's got a tiny signature, W.L. Roderick.
Yes.
Now, it's very rare to get a signature on a piece of scrimshaw, and it's William Lewis Roderick, who was a Welsh physician, who then joined a whaling ship in 1847 and spent the next 6 years on board this bark called the Adventure. And he would have travelled certainly to the South Seas, probably to make his fortune. Because if one appreciates in the middle of the 19th century, whale oil was so important. It provided the heating and the lighting. So it was the equivalent of oil of its day. So, and this is such a charming and exquisitely decorated piece of English folk art. And how much did you have to pay?
Slightly over €100.
100 euros?
Yeah.
Well, I must go to Antwerp more often. I love it. It's in immaculate condition, it's coloured, it's all the action of a whaling, and it's signed by this known scrimshander. I would think at auction, if you took it to the States where the market is, and no trouble about getting to America, it would fetch between 25 and 35,000 pounds.
Yeah.
So you paid 100 euros for it,
Yeah.
and it's worth 300 times more than you paid for it.
I'm very glad to hear that.
Not a bad return,
No, it is.
but worth bringing along today.
Yeah, it's worth the trip.
Good.
I'm flying back this afternoon, and I'm glad I went by.
You can go first class now.
Yeah, probably. I'll try to change the ticket.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a portrait of one cool customer. Is it you?
No, it's my younger brother. His name is Brian.
And where does Brian live?
He lives in Trinidad.
He lives in Trinidad.
Yes.
So interesting, because if we look a little bit closer at the portrait, it's actually an acrylic on board,
Yeah.
and it's been beautifully painted with a lot of passion, a lot of free-flowing brushwork, and you can see in the bottom right corner, it's signed Bosco Holder,
Yes.
who was one of the most famous artists. He was born and brought up in Trinidad.
Yes, he
and
was.
did you know the artist?
It's my uncle,
He's your uncle!
Yeah.
Uncle Bosco!
Uncle Bosco.
Can you tell us a bit about him?
Well, basically, as he brought up in Trinidad, and even as a child, he started painting and playing the piano, and as he grew to learn the art more and more, and then he wanted to expand, and he eventually came to England here, and in the 1950s, lived here for 20 years.
What an amazing story. What's really interesting about him as an artist is he was clearly inspired by all of the great, early 20th century artists. Like you can see the colouring of Matisse. He's got such a confident use of the brushstroke, the way that he's outlined
Yeah.
your brother's figure
Yeah.
is quite impressionistic, but you know exactly what it is. For me, what I love about it as well is that you can feel the vibrancy and the fact that you said it's your brother, and
Yeah.
so it was your brother painted by his uncle.
Yeah.
They clearly had a really nice relationship.
Yeah, very, very nice. They were close, and he actually loved, he loved us so much, and he actually captured my brother's face really well, really well.
And the other thing that I love about someone like Bosco Holder is he wasn't just an artist. He's famous here
Yeah.
because he introduced Britain to the steel bands.
Exactly.
And do you remember him playing?
I haven't seen him play, but I've seen him always on the piano or singing and dancing. So, and he had his own troupe, the Bosco Holder troops, Caribbean dancers. So, and he traveled to Europe as well, came back here. So, he had good friends here as well, really good friends
Amazing.
here.
Do you have any idea what it's worth?
No, I don't actually.
Well, as a portrait by one of Trinidad's most famous artists, this is something that I think any collector would love to hang on their wall. So if it was to come up at auction, it's the sort of thing that we would put an estimate in the region of £1,500 to £2,500,
Wow.
and would really hope for it to do well.
Wow, that's great. That's really good.
So two statues of Buddha. Are you a Buddhist?
No, I'm not a Buddhist. These belong to my father. He was not a Buddhist either, but he really enjoyed beautiful things. And these are two of the pieces that he liked. He had a few others, but those were two special ones for him.
These two pieces are quite different. One is big, the other is little. One is gold, the other is rather dull. Do you know where they're from?
I don't. I assume this one here is from Southeast Asia, Thailand, maybe Laos or Burma. This one, somewhere in Asia as well, but
Okay.
I don't know where.
Well, the first thing that you do when you pick up an object, your subconscious is telling you how heavy it's going to be. And at first sight, you might think, gosh, you're going to have to really lift this hard, and here it goes. And it's light as a feather.
Yep.
It's light as a feather because unlike the smaller bronze, it's made of sheet metal. So if we were to look inside, we'd see a hollow version of what we see on the outside. This is made by a repoussé technique. It's almost certainly from Tibet. Date of manufacture, I think this is 19th century. And because it's made by the technique that I suggested in a mold that can be repeated, it's a relatively inexpensive product. This, however, is actually quite heavy. And it is a piece of solid bronze. And it's very different. It shows the Buddha in a standing stance. The hands are in a slightly different array. Look at the hem of his robe. as it comes back over the shoulder, and then a little sort of drizzle of the seam here, which is then repeated down at the bottom. A little hem, beautiful detail. This is almost certainly from the area you said, Thailand, Cambodia, that area, and is earlier. I would place that in the 17th century. And of course, we're talking about Buddhas, and you cannot put value on Buddha. Buddha would disapprove.
Absolutely.
So we'll leave it at that, shall we?
Okay.
However, there are people in the queue who want to know.
Okay,
So let's give it a go. I think that that as a decorative object, I would put somewhere in the region of maybe £400 to £600.
Mm-hmm.
This little gem, this beautiful little Buddha, I think it must be of the order of £1,500 to £2,500.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much.
Worth meditating on.
Absolutely.
It's just a real smart thing of its era, a real pop object. But where do you come from? How'd you get it?
So we were just decorating our newly flat, and we popped into the local charity shop, and this was in the back. We paid £8 for it, and we went half, so £4 each.
Well, nice that you're sharing, is that? What it is a classic piece of that sort of 60s into 70s sort of pop ceramic. Who's it by? Well, you've got to look at the leaders. I mean, thinking through the thought processes. Really, it's the Germans. You know, the West Germans came with their sort of fat lava, you know, the development where the glaze becomes the most important thing. But equally, there is manufacturers in France who are doing this, in Low Countries, in Belgium. But I personally feel, I think it's got a real German feel to it. This is the kind of thing that really catches my eye. You paid £4 each for it. It's an £8 investment. It's going in your bathroom. I actually think in the right gallery, I can see people down here in London wanting £200 to £300 for this.
Not bad.
For me, the joy of French clocks is you get these wonderful cases. The movement's not quite as special, whereas English clocks, the emphasis is on the movement and a slightly more, if I can say, boring case. What tempted you to this one?
I was visiting Paris with my granddaughter, and we just passed an antique shop. So I went in, I found out the price, obviously, and I got a little bit of the history of the clock.
Mm-hmm. What tempted you specifically?
Well, specifically was that I'd lost 3 people in 2010. A close friend in May, my mother in July, my husband in September. And the people in the shop, they said that the Parisians of that era believed that the souls of the departed went into butterflies, and there's 3 butterflies on the front of the plinth. And so I thought, well, that's meant to be. And I love the clock and the history and just the story. It was
it is a great purchase under the circumstances, and of course the butterflies do symbolise the dead soul. You always see Psyche pictured with a butterfly. So from that point of view, they are pretty much right. But the other great thing is that the lyre is deeply symbolic of various things as well. Are you familiar with the history of the lyre itself?
No, not at all, no.
Well, it's very much an ancient instrument, and for instance, the Greeks used to play lyres while they were reciting poetry and prose. We're going back sort of 500-600 years BC. And then from the point of view of the Greek mythology, the gods, we often see Apollo with a lyre, and of course Orpheus was always with a lyre. So now, to this very day, the lyre is still the symbol of musical perfection. So, what sort of date do you reckon the clock was? If you bought it in Paris, they probably told you.
Yes, I do have papers, and they say about 1805, I believe.
Yes, I'd put it a few years later than that, to be honest. About 1810. I think it's very good looking. Nice size. The movement would have been bought in by this particular company and put into this case, which again would have involved numerous different craftsmen, obviously casters, chasers, gilders, and then it would have been assembled in the premises of Gentilhomme and retailed there. You're going to hate me, but I'm going to draw your attention to the fact that the dial is cracked, chipped, has a bit of restoration. Tell me what you paid in Paris.
Dare I?
Yes, you must.
I paid €6,000.
6,000 euros. Okay. That was a chunk of money for this clock.
Very much so.
It really was, and you would be very hard pushed to get your money back in the UK. I'm actually going to quote you a retail figure of retail probably about £6,000. But bearing in mind there's quite a lot of money to be spent to get it up to tip-top condition.
Well, that's interesting.
But what's far more important, the 3 butterflies and the deep and meaningful reason why you bought the clock.
Thank you very much.
Well, you know, over the last 40 years, I've been very lucky looking at some wonderful, fine furniture. And I must admit, when I saw this, I thought maybe Edwards and Roberts, 1890, very smart-looking desk. But somebody's wrecked it by putting a vice on the front. And then, of course, we open this, and it's not a desk at all. It is, in fact, the most elegant of workshops. And it's a furniture maker's cabinet. Now, it's got a maker's label, you've got a catalogue. Tell me about it.
Yes, it's a Mellish workbench. They were in business from the 1800s through to the Second World War in Fetter Lane, London, and then they were bombed out during the war and they never resurfaced.
And this is the catalogue?
Yes, and this is from 1890s.
Right.
It's called the Excelsior.
The Excelsior.
And the original price would have been £12, 17 shillings and sixpence.
It was a lot of money.
A lot less than I paid for it.
Now, how much did you pay? I can ask you how much you paid for it.
Yeah, I paid £1,050.
Really? I mean, I had imagined this was the sort of thing that you'd see in a very smart drawing room in a country house owned by a very wealthy man. And when everybody had gone to bed, he'd suddenly open it all up and start making furniture because he didn't want people to know he was an artisan. I bet this piece of furniture has seen and been responsible for some wonderful pieces being made, because the quality of the tools and the quality of the thing itself would not be owned by someone who wasn't really competent. You collect these?
I do. This was the second of 4 I purchased, and the other 3 are at home and are bigger versions of this.
Right. But these are the original tools?
These, I bought this complete with all the tools you see here.
I noticed one down here. This particular plane, that steel one. What is amazing is that is a perfect grip for anybody's hand. You know, the modern ones don't have that sort of feel to them, do they? Now, valuation, jolly difficult, except, fortunately, within the last month, one of these has turned up, but without any tools, and in pretty poor state, and it made £1,400. Now, some of these chisels, some of these tools are quite valuable in their own right, from £20, £30 to £300 or £400. And I think that, an estimate, if you were going to sell it in this condition, with the tools as immaculate as they are, probably £2,500 for this. And congratulations, I think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
When you film an Antiques Roadshow in a capital city, you hope that something will be brought along that will tell you about London. And my goodness, this does, even if it is just a brick.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the brick came from Thomas Farner's baker's shop in Pudding Lane, where the Great Fire of London broke out on the 4th of September 1666, 350 years ago.
And this can be the only brick, surely, that survived
well,
from the baker's
we are
shop.
not aware of another, let's put it that way. I can't say definitively that that's the case, but we've never run across another.
You're from the Worshipful Company of Firefighters.
Correct.
As one of the city guilds.
Mm-hmm.
How do you come to have this brick?
Well, it was presented to us by the Guildhall Museum on the formation of the company. Guildhall Museum is now part of the Museum of London.
So let's go back to that moment in September in the baker shop in Pudding Lane. The fire starts, it rages for 3 days, consumes something like 70,000 medieval dwellings within the Roman wall of the City of London. It was an extraordinary erasing of the city, wasn't it?
Yes, it destroyed about 2/3 of all the houses in North London. Part of the reason why it spread so fiercely was that there was an extremely strong east to west wind which was blowing throughout the 3 days of the fire. The fire never spread south of the river because, of course, the Thames formed a perfect barrier to stop it spreading.
I was talking to our expert about this. There's a bit of a sort of thing went around the roadshow when we knew this brick was coming in. We can't value it, really. I mean, there isn't another one.
No.
It's never going to be sold.
No.
How can you put a value on that? I mean, this humble little object tells of a remarkable time in the history of our nation and, of course, in the history of our capital. And from that fire, so much rebuilding was done. St. Paul's great cathedral. And it all started with the fire where this brick came from.
Correct, and we're very proud to own it.
I'm rather thrilled to see it.
when you showed me this, I had to sit down because nothing beyond my wildest dreams would have thought that I would have seen something so magnificent as this, and so architecturally sort of in keeping with where we are.
Well, my grandfather was a friend of Kaczynski, the jeweller, and this was made for my grandmother to wear at her daughter's wedding. I think it's called metamorphic jewellery, and it can actually be worn 3 different ways. This is the brooch, but it can also be broken down to be worn as clips on dresses, which was very fashionable in the 1950s. And there's also a separate framework where it can be worn as a necklace. So 3 different ways.
And she wore it as a necklace at the wedding?
She wore it as a necklace at the wedding, but I tend to wear it as the brooch. It's a little easier to wear.
I have had a very long look at the piece and I can't find any marks on it whatsoever. And you have mentioned the word Kaczynski, which of course were very famous and well-established jewellers, very much in the 50s,
yes.
But they started off in the East End of London. They came over from Poland. But the rich and the famous and the discerning jewellery buyer, they would all have a piece of Kaczynski in their collection. And the baguette diamonds here and this wonderful movement. I mean, it's a very bold jewel.
Yes.
So not only have you brought me this amazing jewel, but also this wonderful bracelet. So what's the story with that one?
Well, the story of that one is that the manufacturer, his workshop was in Black Lion Yard, again, very close to my grandfather. And we're not entirely sure, but we think the story is that perhaps this was made for another customer, that customer didn't then pay for it, or actually it wasn't delivered. The manufacturing jeweller needed to sell it because obviously there was a lot of investment in there. And my grandfather again bought it for my grandmother.
Your grandmother, very, very lucky lady.
A very lucky lady indeed.
So it was a sort of a similar period because this is sort of on the 50s as well?
Yes, I think a little later than this one in fairness, but around that time.
Well, exactly. I mean, my goodness me. Value. Well, do you know, to even find a workshop that could make this today is, really hard. And the hours that would have gone into this. Now, I don't know if it's platinum or white gold. Normally, jewellery of this period of the 50s is white gold.
Yes.
But Kaczynski Joseph really did pioneer platinum jewellery, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was platinum.
The story in the family is that it was platinum.
Yeah. First of all, I'd go with the value of this bracelet. And I would say at auction, you'd be looking at around about £30,000 to £40,000.
Yeah. Okay.
Meanwhile, this one.
Yes.
Meanwhile, this one.
Yes.
I would say you'd be looking in the region of around about £80,000.
Thank you, Papa.
Even me saying that makes my hair stand up on end because I don't think I've ever said that on Antiques Roadshow before. But I mean, absolutely fabulous. And gosh, enjoy wearing them.
I will.
I feel as though I've gone back in time and I'm in a 1970s department store.
I know, it's wonderful.
Where did you get that suit?
I bought it at Bieber's, Kensington, back in the early 70s.
And was the shop absolutely heaving with people? I mean, I've read about Bieber,
yes,
but of course wasn't there to experience it.
Well, to be quite honest, I was so single-minded and I was so determined to buy myself this trouser suit.
And Barbara Hulanicki started Bieber, didn't she?
She did, yes.
By selling mail-order dresses.
I gathered that. I never bought mail order. I went straight to the store.
And what year was that in? Do you remember the day you bought it?
I was going on 18, so say 1972.
And why did you buy it? What had happened?
Well, I was not long left school, and I went to a party where I was meeting some of my old school friends, and one of them was wearing this wonderful trouser suit. So I asked her where she bought it, and she was Bieber's, and I thought, okay, that's me.
It's a sort of a woven, almost tapestry material.
Yes.
But these wonderful, outsized musical notes. And Barbara Hulanicki was very much inspired in that early 70s period by sort of Art Deco design. So many of the outfits that she designed had great big chevrons on them.
Yes.
And it's always the more extreme designs that catch the eye. I love the buttons.
I know.
What do they remind you of?
They look like vinyl records.
Vinyl records, yes. So it's a really ingenious
which
design,
we were buying at the time. Yes.
And you wore it?
Oh, yes.
Did you wear it that night?
The following weekend I did.
I bet you couldn't wait for the weekend to come.
Oh, no. Oh, yes. Thoroughly enjoyed it, yes. That's me. You haven't got me head to toe, but it gives you an idea. I actually wore it.
Yes, and that's you wearing it.
Yes.
It's great that you have both pieces. And for an ordinary suit in the current market would have a value in the region of £100 or so.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly an ordinary suit. This very graphic design means that it puts it sort of in a league of its own.
Yeah.
And I think it has a value of £600 to £800.
Really? Well, I actually am very surprised at that. Wow, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
What a lot of Lego men.
Yes.
These are not particularly old, are they? Despite this being the Antiques Roadshow, this is probably one of the newest things we're going to see today.
They're not particularly old, no. They started issuing the Star Wars license in 1999, and they're still producing them now. But what we're looking at is only figures from episodes 4, 5 and 6, the original Star Wars trilogy.
Right.
I also have collections of the newer films, the newer series, but these are my real
Hang on a minute, collections of, so there's more than this?
There's much more than this, yes. I've got about 550 in total.
Okay.
The most valuable one I have here is the chrome gold C-3PO.
This is normally my job to tell you the value, but I think in this instance I'm going to defer to your expert knowledge.
I do know too much about it. Also, the Boba Fett just here is very rare. Each of those are worth about £350 to £400, loose like this.
What can I buy for a couple of quid?
Well, for a couple of quid, you could get an X-Wing pilot, something like that. These are produced, in their hundreds of thousands.
For me, this is the future of a lot of collecting. Once upon a time, it was crested china or sort of Dalton figurines or early porcelain.
Yes.
But I think now collecting has moved on, and those people who have disposable income, the desire to collect, it's about collective consciousness. It's about nostalgia. What you had as a child, what you watch now. It's about Star Wars, The Simpsons,
pop
all
culture.
of that. So, in total, the whole collection. What are we going to say for this selection here?
This selection,
£1,500.
£1,500, yeah. For my entire collection, probably nearer about £5,000 and going up every day.
Well, rumour has it that you come all the way from Australia to bring me these wonderful drawings, these designs, architects, if you like, drawings for jewellery.
Yes, indeed. Come a long way.
And tell me all about them in your life.
I once met a very elderly gentleman in Melbourne who had a very distinguished career as a jewellery designer, and he got his start designing a brooch for Her Majesty the Queen.
Marvellous.
His name was Ross Allen, very stylish and elegant gentleman.
Yes.
And his designs were incredibly beautiful and still produced by a certain jeweller today.
Oh, good. But these are autograph designs, aren't they? I mean, they're literally painted by him in watercolour on paper. And that, in our world, is the holy grail, because jewellery designs are much rarer than the finished article, because they were sent to the workshops, and the workmen would be all over the place with their cups of coffee and their cigarettes, and then it was made up, approved, and more often than not found its way into the bin.
I happen to have seen one of the brooches, which was designed in the late 60s, and it was that one there, a diamond twist.
A diamond twist?
Yes,
yeah, sort of switchback thing.
Yes, very beautiful, in a private collection in Melbourne.
Yes, and with baguette diamonds and brilliant cut diamonds in platinum, presumably.
Yes,
well,
indeed.
That's very, very good. I've actually seen this brooch here in the form of a lollipop.
Really?
This very brooch, because I've been looking at jewellery for far too long now, decades and decades. It's made of rhodonite and quartzite and nephrite, and then it's melting with diamonds in gold.
That's marvellous.
But this one here is the one that really counts, isn't it? Because tell us all about that.
Well, this design, which dates to 1953, is for a brooch which was presented from the government and people of Australia to Her Majesty the Queen on her first visit and triumphant tour of the country. It was commissioned from William Drummond and Co., at that time considered Australia's best jeweller.
Yes.
And in 160 diamonds, the result was absolutely stunning and still regularly worn by Her Majesty.
Amazing, isn't it? And I think you've got a photograph of her wearing it, haven't you?
Yes, I have indeed.
Look at that. Isn't that wonderful? On her right shoulder is the very brooch itself.
Yes.
Well, I think it's absolutely marvellous, and if we say that they're worth £200 each, it's probably far too little. It's £1,200, £1,500, it simply doesn't matter. These are rarer than we can ever imagine and are treasured by you, and that's really what counts, isn't it?
Oh, yes, indeed, and thank you very much for taking the time.
So this is really a tale of two clocks, isn't it? And it's the large and the small, it's the bold and the brave, and they are fascinating. What was it that attracted you to the big one?
Well, I was teaching in a degree course on architectural history and design, and we were going through the arts and crafts period, and I thought it would be nice, instead of showing slides to the students, I would show real arts and crafts.
Good grief. I mean, you are the lecturer I dreamed that I would actually be taught by. You actually went out and bought the things. That's fantastic. It is obviously arts and crafts period, so we're talking, round about 1900 in date, thereabouts. And of course, what I love is this sort of treatment. It looks as though it's been riveted together by somebody who then went on to rivet the Titanic together. It's a real piece of engineering, isn't it? And also the face, it's a new treatment, isn't it? It's way ahead of whatever else is being made in the clock world. Because I'm talking to you about this when my colleague Richard Price, who's here today, should be talking about clocks, but he knows and I knows it's all about the actual clock case, not the movement. And then I love this Tempus Fugit. Well, let's go on to its little cousin, because I'm not able to give you a name with regards to the maker of this clock, but obviously I can do it with this one. And I'm sure you know the name I'm going to come out with, which is Archibald Knox, because this is a clock that probably dates from after 1902. This is Tudoric pewter. It follows on from Kimrick silver, but pewter's more affordable. And Archibald Knox, he's there on the Isle of Man, and he's designing lots of different things for Liberty. And he did a huge number of clock cases. Again, the emphasis is on the clock case, because I'm going to turn this around and I'm just going to show the movement. That is why our clock expert today has no great interest in this clock. It's a very basic movement. And so we have here a beautifully enamelled clock face with the original hands as well. I'm intrigued to know what you might have paid for this 40 years ago. About
300 or 400.
About 300 or 400 pounds. And what about this one?
It's probably the same.
300 to 400 pounds. Let me tell you now that this particular clock, it's difficult to be precise. Most auction rooms would now quote 800 to 1,200 pounds for that. Okay. This one I sold quite a few of in years gone by. Today, you would have to pay for this one £4,000.
That's surprising.
Now, I love medals. I've loved medals since I was 6. And your box is full of wonderful things. Who did these belong to?
They belong to my father-in-law. He collected medals up until about 30 years ago.
Okay.
And then he passed them on to my son.
And you keep them in a plastic box?
They're in a plastic box.
Okay, well, the medals that you have are from 1798, Battle of the Nile, Nelson. 1799, Seringapatam, fighting in India with Lord Wellington. This one, first medal ever issued to the British forces, Waterloo,
Wow.
18th of June, 1815. The one in the middle is a bravery award. That is called the Médaille Militaire. That's French, invented by Napoleon himself. How many more you got?
That's about 30, 40.
Another 30 or 40. Similar looking?
Yes.
This one, the Waterloo one, as I say, in 1815 was the first medal we ever had as an army or a navy. And in 1847, Queen Victoria asked the question, what medal is there for people who fought at the Battle of Trafalgar? And she was told, well, Mum, there are some coin-type things. There's another one of these sort of in the set for Trafalgar. So she said, well, what about the men who fought with Wellington in the Peninsular War? And they said, again, Mum, there are just coins. So she invented a medal, the General Service Medal, one for the Army and one for the Navy. This one for the Army, dated between 1793 and 1814, with the little clasps denoting which battles you had been in. This one for the Royal Navy, from 1793 to 1840, because they had no medals at all, the Royal Navy, up to that point. The trick of this really is that in 1847, when these were made or invented, you still had to be alive to claim them. So if you'd been 50 years old in 1793, the chances of you still being around are very slim. So they are actually quite rare. And you seem to have managed to get in your plastic box one of the best known and one of the rarest.
Oh, wow.
Because this one is for the Battle of Trafalgar. with Nelson himself? Plastic box.
Plastic box, yeah.
Well, this one, on its own, is £7,500.
God.
Your whole collection that you have on the table is £15,000.
Oh, my son's going to be very pleased.
I really wish you bought the others.
So do I.
Because I don't know what you've got, but if it's the same quality as this, it's one superb collection.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Well, I can see that this is a box of mementos from a wedding day, but whose wedding was it and where were they?
This is my great-grandparents, and it was a wedding in Bulawayo.
Oh, so what we now know of as Zimbabwe?
Yeah, and it was in 1898.
What were they doing out there in 1898?
My great-grandfather was mining diamonds. When my grandmother was 9, went on an expedition and never returned. And 2 years later, her mother died of the Spanish influenza.
We've got a photograph of a very happy day here.
Yeah.
But actually, it represents something that was actually tragic. This is really a time capsule of a day nearly 120 years ago.
Yeah, it's really weird, and I have to say I really dislike it.
That's not what most people say on the Antiques Roadshow about their treasured heirlooms.
No, my mum hates it as well, so we don't really know what to do with it, because it's like this collection of creepy Miss Havisham things.
Well,
what does one do with this?
There is a value to it.
Yeah.
And these two gold bangles and then a propelling pencil, they have a value of around £250.
Yeah.
But maybe you could just, I don't know, write the story, wrap it up, go to a field, dig a hole.
Yeah.
And, make it another time
Well,
capsule.
That's definitely a good idea.
I bet you this has got an amazing story.
It's really the story of a wartime Jewish girl who, when the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938, her family sent her to Britain, and she was actually the only one to survive that we're aware of. So she arrived, together with this, in 1939 in Britain, just of course as war broke out.
But why was she carrying this jewel?
Well, it's a very good question. And if you can imagine, a late 20s Austrian girl with no family here, family left behind, she probably needed to carry with her some sort of insurance, maybe some sort of, a little bit of something in her back pocket. And I believe it was the case that sometimes jewels and things were sewn into the coats, into linings or into pockets.
Absolutely.
Just a bit of help if she needed it. But as it turns out, she never did need it.
Because it's here now.
Indeed.
So what is the relationship between her and your family?
She married an Englishman in 1946, who sadly passed away in 1955, and she then became effectively a war widow. Now, in London at that time, there was a group of homes set up for war widows called the Hill Homes, quite close to Kenwood, so in North London, and she moved into those homes. My mother was the vice chairman of those homes for about 20 years and became very close, very friendly with this lady, Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth sadly passed away in 1983, she left a lot of her estate to charity, but she left this to my mother.
Really?
As a little token of her esteem and friendship.
Well, I'm a bit speechless, actually, because the journey that this has undertaken, and it has had a journey of its own too, because it didn't start off life as a pendant like this. This has sort of changed as well. This chain here is a much later addition. If you look on the back, it did have a brooch fitting, which it doesn't have anymore. So someone's changed it to make it into a pendant. But the actual jewel, again, I'm quite interested in the fact that it's come, originally from Austria, because there are no marks on it at all. And it's very English in style. And the actual style of it is about 1890, that sort of period.
Right.
And it's silver and gold. And you've got rose-cut diamonds, and you've got cushion-shaped diamonds, and you've got these two beautiful rubies. So, at auction, I would say that this would be around about £3,000 to £5,000.
Right. Well, that's much more than I'd have thought, so I'm most impressed.
Thank you very much indeed for bringing in a very special jewel.
Thank you.
Our visitors today have brought along items from home, their precious objects, but we have here something that belongs to the University of London, and in particular the School of Oriental and African Studies, and it is very precious indeed. Now, Professor Keith Howard, you're the man who's going to tell us all about it. And this is a scroll of a delegation.
It's a hand scroll, probably from 1655, or commemorating the 1655 dispatch of Korean envoys, ambassadors, to the Japanese court. It unrolls from this end, and that means they're going towards Edo, Tokyo, and the ambassadors are way at the back. It's more than 12 metres long.
I mean, a 12-metre scroll. Was that designed to be displayed at its full length?
No, it is a hand scroll that shows the sort of pomp, the glory of these processions. It was probably produced either on the shogun's orders, the king, the emperor's orders, or from one
Japan.
That's right, or from one of the chiefs, probably the Tsushima clan chief, the daimyo. And what happened with these envoys? There were 12 of them, from 1603 to 1811. Only 12.
Korean envoys.
Korean envoys.
Who would come to Japan.
That's right. And they'd be met in Tsushima by a Japanese samurai, who we get down here.
So these are them with their two swords?
With two swords, that's
Always
right.
with two?
For samurai, yes. But then we get the Koreans here, and the Koreans you can tell immediately because they have these wide-brimmed hats, horsehair and bamboo, and these are pikes and things. There would be military banners. The 1655 delegation had 488 Korean men in it, which was one of the largest ever sent to Japan. And when they got to Edo, Tokyo, they were there to meet the shogun. In 1655, it was the 5th shogun of the Tokugawa period. He was only 14, but he'd just come to the throne, so they were celebrating his ascension to the throne.
And this is done on paper?
Yes.
These are, what, watercolours are they, or is this a kind of tempera?
It's tempera, but with gold, and obviously with ink.
And the gold is to signify what, the clouds, is it?
Yes, there is no real background here. You don't see the people, you don't see a panorama of scenery, but we have clouds, and you can see the typical sort of mark of what the clouds were.
And what strikes me about it is the colours cannot be that different from when it was painted all those years ago.
That's right, because it's rolled up all the time.
And so when it was displayed, presumably as a way of saying, look how important I am, that I have something of this magnificence, it would just be displayed like we're doing now, in sections.
That's right.
Another thing that makes this so special is that it is so rare.
It is indeed, yes. A hand scroll of this size, this lavish, is hardly known. There are quite a lot of surviving things from these dispatches of Korean envoys to Japan. A lot of them are designed as mementos. This is more than that.
Well, we're very honoured to see it. Thank you.
Here we are in one of the most iconic Art Deco buildings in London. Architecture opened the show, and so it continues here. And we have yet more iconic Art Deco buildings. Here we have BBC Television Centre and Langham Place and Portland Place. But what does this mean to you? Why do you have this?
This all started off with my grandfather, who was the quantity surveyor on Broadcasting House, as you see here. And this is my mother, his daughter, who obviously has a lot of history and a lot of knowledge about him.
So when you say he was the quantity surveyor for these two BBC buildings, is that all he did? I mean, am I looking at everything here?
Well, he did every building for the BBC. White City, Pebble Mill, starting off with this Broadcasting House.
So effectively, your father built the buildings that house the BBC in its entirety?
Yes, I worked for him for a short while in the 50s, the early 50s. I'm quite a hard man to work for, because he didn't mind if it went on till 11 o'clock at night. We had to get it all right and out on time. I had to call him Sir.
You had to call your father Sir?
Yes.
Very.
Oh, there was no hello, Daddy, or anything like that. It was Sir.
He would have worked with, of course, Eric Gill, the great sculptor whose sculptures decorate the building, and also Serge Chamayeff and architects like Wells Coates as well. So he would have really worked with this great sort of milieu of designers of the time. And he built up an incredible sort of portfolio of buildings. Here we have Broadcasting House, Langham Place, and then just down here, the famous donut that made up Television Centre up until 2013, which I think now is being converted into flats. But is this all you've got, or is this just a small part?
We've got a lot more archives. We've kept them from over the years.
We have to give a value with these sorts of things, but for me, value is a multifaceted word. So financially, it feels to me that somebody might be prepared to pay around sort of, let's say, £600, maybe £1,000 for an album like this. I think if you're looking at other buildings across the nation, perhaps slightly less exciting, together, without knowing the scope of it, I'd like to say the collection would fetch in excess of £5,000. This is an absolutely critical archive.
Thank you very much.
Well, you've been a steward for us today at the Antiques Roadshow, and at the end of the day, you bring me a brick. Where did it come from?
From my aunt.
Okay.
She gave it to me a long time ago.
Right. And also, you studied here at SOAS.
Yes, I studied here Arabic.
So, this is Oriental, you studied Arabic. Is this something that she gave you thinking it could inspire you or arouse your curiosity?
I think so, because my aunt always thought that French art is the best. So Oriental art was not so precious for her, and she kept giving me some textiles, some ceramics, and she gave me one of those as well.
Fantastic. Well, let's put it right that Asian art can also be very, very fine. Sat in the middle of this brick, moulded in high relief, is a figure of Amitayus, one of the meditational deities of Buddhism. But can you see what she's holding centrally? A little vase.
Oh,
and that holds the elixir of life.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I also noticed, and I hope you won't mind me saying this, 2 little drops of wax and a little bit of dust and a slight smell of incense. I mean...
Yes, because they are holes, and I just put a joss stick there, and sometimes I used to burn it, and then I put some lavender as well, so it smells nice. But for the last couple of years, I was just pressing the papers with this brick in the corner of the room, somewhere behind the bed.
Well, look, it's a very honest brick. I just will flick it round to show that it is indeed part of an architectural feature. It may have been part of a big frieze. You may have had perhaps as many as 500 of these bricks, just like a wall in some part of a temple, perhaps on a pillar, perhaps under the eaves of the roof. Obviously, Buddhism was very prevalent in China. But I think this was made at the end of the Ming dynasty, perhaps the beginning of the Qing. So we're looking at end of the 16th, perhaps into the 17th century. They are quite hard to date accurately, but the lotus throne on which Amitayus sits there in meditative pose is glazed in an aubergine colour, typical of the late Ming. Value, ever thought about it? Your brick, your doorstop?
I went to Victoria and Albert Museum and to British Museum, and I was looking for something similar, but I couldn't find in those colours.
Came away
I thought that it's not really souvenir item because it's too heavy, you know?
I mean, look at it. £1,500.
Good.
For a brick.
Yes.
A very old brick. So you're still going to burn candles to Amitayus?
Yes, I will. I will. Thank you.
This is absolutely typical of what I might call the New English Art Club look. It's big, it's directly painted at some speed, it's got an extraordinary light in it, and it's very 1970s. Who's it by?
It's by my father, William Bowyer, RA. He died a year and a half ago. This is me in the picture. I'm an Emma, and this is my grandmother, Emma, in the picture with Molly.
She's the third person.
Yeah, she is the third person.
And you brought Molly along?
I brought Molly along, yes.
It's fantastic. How long would it have taken to do this enormous picture?
This would have been a weekend event because Dad was still teaching. So it would have been at weekends. As you can see, it's dark. Light was so precious to him. The studio lights are on. And I would be very grumpy because Mum had given me tea and we would have gone up to the studio and I would have sat for maybe 2 hours.
You'd been at school all day?
I'd have been at school.
And so the last thing you wanted to do was sit still?
Sit still and...
1973. It's a very good example of direct painting, isn't it? There's very little drawing on it. He's attacked it really fast.
Yeah.
And he might say, as Whistler said, okay, so the work of a weekend, but a lifetime to know how.
Yeah,
Something
definitely.
like that.
His great buddy was Ruskin Spear, who lived not far from us.
Yeah, because they both lived in West London, didn't they?
They did. Ruskin was round the corner from us, and he was my godfather.
In order to tie you down as a teenage girl, this very strange figure...
This is Molly. Ruskin gave her to my father.
So he owned it before?
He owned it before, and Ruskin had no more use for it, so Dad, obviously a willing younger artist, was absolutely, yes, I'll have it.
She's beautifully made. She's fully articulated under here with a wooden skeleton. This kind of stocking material is stuffed with sawdust and horsehair.
Okay.
And is it beautiful, the head?
Yeah. Oh, Yes, well, we knew that, but it is...
You do that?
We do it, but we try not to scare the little great-grandchildren.
But it's got a number here, which is why I did that.
Ah.
Because I've been talking to my friend Adam Schoon, who's very much an expert in such things, that it's entirely possible this model is a famous maker in Paris of the early 19th century, as long ago as that. And as such, it may have been in the possession of not just a few artists, British ones in London, sort of in the 20th century, but actually generations of different artists may have had this model. It would have been very expensive originally in the early 19th century. It might have cost £50 in old money to buy this model. It's so well made and so distinctively made that we think that it's the work of one maker called Paul Huot. And without doubt, he was the best of them. French made the best, and he was the best Frenchman making them. Right, now, I like the picture very much. I really like the light in it. I think that these silent partners, the three of you with your different reasons for sitting as you are, it's fascinating. And I think it would appeal, but I think really only at £4,000 to £6,000, that sort of level. What about this?
Molly. What's that, Molly?
It's very old. It's extremely strange. It's in quite good condition for what it is, and it's worth between £10,000 and £15,000.
Wow. Wow. I'm amazed. Molly takes on a whole new light. We do love her, though. Very much part of the family. Lovely. Thank you.
Very nice to meet you too. Ooh, I can't express quite how unpleasant that feels. It's like something out of Revenge of the Mummy. But you know, she has graced artist studios since the early 19th century. That's through the period of Impressionism. Who knows what artists she's seen? From my new chum and me in the Antiques Roadshow. Bye-bye.